Welcome to Different Leaf, a show for new and experienced cannabis consumers. I'm Brit Smith. We hope you're having a great summer so far. If you're on the road, make sure you check out the first few episodes of our summer travel and cannabis season, including the episode on Indigenous cannabis rights and our first episode with Different Leaf magazine's food and cannabis writer, Chala June. This episode, we're going to explore 3 tourist hotspot cities well known for being full of cannabis culture: Chicago, Illinois, San Francisco, California, and Portland, Oregon. Now, even if you're from these areas or you've been to them plenty of times before, there are so many options in each city for gorgeous themed dispensaries, extremely cool experiences, and truly amazing food. I mean, as a visitor who's looking to heighten your travels with some good local bud, where do you even start planning what to smoke, see, and do? Well, we've got you. This episode, our guests are going to dive into some of the most weird and wonderful things that tourists can enjoy while trying the local cannabis in the Bay, the Windy City, and Portlandia. Now, you may think that you know the best spots to go already, but we're going to shine a light on how each city's cannabis scene has changed over the years and why traveling to them post-pandemic will likely feel a lot different than the years gone by. If you've got your new summer 2023 issue of Different Leaf the magazine handy, flip to page 36 where you can read our first Cannabis City Travel Guide, which includes the articles by our 3 wonderful travel writers, Hannah, Mina, and Carly, who are also going to be our guests today. They've written about the coolest pot shops, lounges, sites, and the truly hidden gems that stoner travelers won't want to miss in Chicago, San Fran, and Portland. If you haven't got your issue yet, head on over to differentleaf.com to order your copy, or check out the subscribe and shop tab to find your nearest in-person retailer. That's differentleaf.com. And we'll be right back after this quick break to chat with Different Leaf travel writers Hannah Vyosky, Mina Thiruvengadam, and Carly Fisher.
Hi, my name is Hannah Vyosky. I am a cannabis writer. Luckily ended up getting to write more about Chicago in my home state of Illinois right now.
Welcome. So happy to have you here, my good friend Hannah. Let's talk about what you have written about for Different Leaf, the new summer issue. We're flying high across a couple different cities, and you have written for us about Chicago, the Windy City. So let's talk about getting high in the Chi. We've got so many dispensaries in this article that sound really, really cool to visit. Do you have a favorite of all of these?
Yeah, I was just thinking about that right before this, actually. And I kind of have a bit of a tie. I really enjoyed the overall experience at IB Hall and how it feels kind of like a luxury, kind of feels like you walk in the Great-Gatsby to buy weed kind of moment. I thought that was really fun. Yes. But at the same time, I did a tour of Mission dispensaries in South Chicago, and I was just really impressed with the staff and how friendly it was and how it just, I don't know, it felt like a very homey dispensary. And I was really impressed with the customer service and speed of it as well too, but also just the patience to like slow down and educate the consumers that were coming in and had questions. So I just thought it was a very kind environment. It was very relaxed, and that just really stands out to me as well too.
Cool. So that's really good, I guess, for folks that are coming to Chicago and maybe they're new consumers and they want to take their time getting to know what to try while they're in the city.
Yeah, absolutely. Dispensary 33 is always a kind environment too. I feel like that's a bit more of a fast-paced, so kind of get in, get through, get out, and get on your way kind of vibe. Yeah. But I like that as well too. So definitely a bit of everything. And I wanted to range from about 5 different areas in the Chicago space because in my experience, I always feel like you end up in one spot when you thought you were going to be in another. So It's good to just kind of know what might be a good spot if you end up in Bucktown versus Andersonville or something like that.
Right. Absolutely. So there's a ton of dispensaries across Chicago and the rest of Illinois. It's really started to pop off out there. What sorts of products do you guys have that we might not have anywhere else that if tourists were coming to Chicago, they should definitely try?
That's a great question. I think something I like to promote is like I really like what brands are up to with behind the scenes of their products as well too. So a company that's really standing out to me right now is 93 Boys. Every time you buy a 93 Boys product, they donate a portion of funds to funding libraries in Illinois state prisons. And I just find that to be a really important movement to give back to the community and social equity as well.
Love that.
I know.
What products do they have?
So they have flour, and I picked up a 1 gram cartridge like not too long ago. And luckily, I just take like a few puffs of a vape here and there. So it's lasts me quite a while. But yeah, they have really beautiful packaging as well. But I just, their slogan is for the block, portions of every puff donated back to the community. So they're very interesting. Yes, absolutely. They stick out to me right now.
When you travel to a new place, you do want to try that local stuff. You want to see what the local flavors are, and you want to support local causes. So that's a really great one to look out for if you're in Chicago. Speaking of vaping and smoking, once we've bought our products from these super cool dispensaries, what are the consumption rules out there? Can I smoke in the streets? Is there any lounges I can go to? Or is it a gray area like the rest of the world?
You know what? I would say it's a friendly gray area, but with the state laws, like there is really no allowance for public consumption. You pretty much have to be in your owned home to be able to consume technically legally. But there are more and more consumption spaces popping up. The one that stands out to me right now is there's Rise in Mundelein, Illinois. So that is about 45 minutes north of Chicago, I believe. So it's a bit outside the area, but I do like, me being from a small town, I do like the suburb feel of going into like a lounge and just kind of hanging out there. And then kind of have a tradition of with my sister or a friend, like just going to the consumption lounge and getting really baked and then just going out to like a really great steak dinner or something just down the road. So it's a cozy feeling. So I like that place. I just hope eventually we'll see a bit more popping up inside the Chicago area as well as across the state as well.
For sure, yeah. So if folks want to go to those private clubs, you essentially have to become a member, which involves filling out some information about yourself, paying a small fee, and then it's BYOC, bring your own cannabis. And so whatever you've got from the dispensary, essentially you can bring into this private establishment, and much like a cigar bar, you're allowed to consume on site. So that's good to know. There are some of those out there, and they operate like private clubs, so they're sort of another gray area of the issue of consumption. It's a big deal. And when you're traveling, you want to know that what you're doing is legal. You don't want to get in trouble where you're not from. That's hassle you don't need. You're trying to just get high and have a good time. So, all right, good to know. Now let's move on to what you can do once you've tried some of that good Chi-Town bud. You wrote about some of the coolest things that you can do in Chicago and around Chicago once you get high. Let's talk about Oz Park. I never knew this existed.
Yes. To start off, I wanted to pick out like a few places that for me, and I know everyone's cannabis consumption is different. Sometimes you want to do it for fun. And for me, I'm always trying to do it for fun, but I'm also kind of a bit of an anxious in my shell type person. So I really wanted to pick out a few places that I thought were really culturally interesting to Chicago, but also weren't very overstimulating as well, too. So I found Oz Park to be really interesting. I've been there a few times, but actually the author of The Wizard of Oz was born and raised, lived in Chicago. So he's pretty well honored from the community and especially his neighborhood, which Oz Park is in. So it's just a normal park where you see like kids playing soccer games. There's dogs out, but they have really amazing sculptures of the characters of Wizard of Oz. So it's just kind of a nice, like, wow, you could have a picnic next to like Dorothy or something like that.
And if you've had a gummy before that could be really enjoyable.
That's what I was thinking. So it's just kind of I always found it to be fun, and it's always something I look forward to. I'm like, if you're in Chicago in the summer, like, and you just want to like have a picnic outside or do something chill, like this is definitely a good spot to go.
That's awesome. That's so
take
good.
It all in.
Yeah. Another thing that I think that Chicago is well known for is music. And you mentioned the Redhead Piano Bar. What do you think is so good there that stoners would enjoy?
I just think it's another just unique aspect of Chicago of how cool these piano bars are. Like, I've been to New York a handful of times and I've experienced the music scene out there, and I haven't done much travel outside of that. But when I go to Chicago, like the piano bars always feel like a very local experience to how unique they are, and finding just like these underground up and rising artists and how talented they are on the piano. And, you just have like a few drinks after a cozy day, smoking weed or having some edibles. And you can just like, before you know it, you can be like singing along and dancing to like piano music with like people you don't know, and like having like that really fun singing and dancing experience with strangers, which is,
I love that.
I love that too.
Yes,
so it really breaks me out of my shell. It's always a good memory to heart. So it's just something that I always remember and like to do when I'm high and wanting to hang out with friends out there.
Yeah. And there's really nothing that feels better when you're high than listening to really, really good, passionately played music like you'd find in a piano bar. That's a really good recommendation. The other recommendation that you made in your article in Different Leaf that caught my eye sort of crossed over with the munchies, and it's like a McDonald's. I was like, why would you put a McDonald's in there? There are McDonald's everywhere. What's different about the McDonald's that you're talking about?
Well, it's a global menu restaurant, McDonald's, so you can have almost anything from anywhere. Hopefully it's available the day you show up, but you show up and...
So like I could get like a chicken tikka masala from India sort of
or
dish.
like a cheesy bacon burger from Poland, or they also have like matcha green tea lattes or different types of desserts from all over. So it's just a very unique palate experience when you're hungry, I would say.
Can we take a second and look up some more of the items on this menu? Because
you should. I was trying to name a few more. I hear a rumor that there's spaghetti sometimes.
Whoa, what?
Yeah.
Okay, so the menu there changes monthly. But at the time that this article was written, they have like McSpicy chicken burger, which is usually sold in Hong Kong, Singapore, the Philippines, Indonesia. Breakfast burgers. Taco shaker fries, spelt T-A-K-O, taco, I don't know, it's from Finland, and the matcha green tea McFlurry, which originated in Japan. And you can get sweet potato fries from the Netherlands, or a triple onion burger from South Korea. I don't know if you want that.
You might. I love onions.
It is more than 6,000 square feet of McDonald's craziness. So if you're high and in Chicago, that sounds like a really, really cool place to go. Bring your wallet because you may really have the munchies, and that stuff can start to add up.
Quite an array.
But it depends what month you go there. So, sometimes you might go there and there'll be something different. So what would you say that if folks are going to Chicago, they should definitely not miss if they're stoners?
That's such a good question. There's so many different things going on all the time out there. Follow social media accounts for different restaurants and festivals going on, and just like keep up and like make yourself part of the community out there. To answer that question, Chicago has like especially good Roman bathhouses, I would say.
What?
And that sounds incredibly niche, I would say. I'm trying to think of this. AIRE, Ancient Baths, Chicago. I hear it's like taking a bath in Game of Thrones.
What?
So
wow.
I have to admit, I have not done it myself, but I think about it every time, and I want to do that next time. So if you look it up on the website, it's just like a luxurious, like there's candles. I hear like everyone says like the water is amazing. Like I don't know how the water can be so amazing for everyone to tell me about it, but I want to find out.
Wicked. Well, Chicago's definitely on my list of places to try and go get high. So I really, really appreciate you writing this article for us. The one final thing that I will plug that I think is a super cool idea if you are into cannabis and you're in Chicago is that you can now get CBD water in the Cubs stadium. So if you want to go and see a Major League Baseball game, go watch some baseball and enjoy some CBD drinks in the stands. Hannah, thank you. Thank you so, so much for joining us today. This was a very interesting conversation.
Yes, thanks for having me. It's such an honor. I have been following Different Leaf since I started writing in cannabis, so it's an honor to be having something coming out. Thanks for having me.
I am Meena Thiruvengadam. I'm a Chicago-based freelance journalist and editorial consultant. I'm also the editor-in-chief of travelwithmeena.com. And for Different Leaf this month, I have written about a cannabis-themed long weekend in Portland. So I give you the best dispensaries to hit and the best things to do. And of course, what to eat when you've got the munchies.
That is exactly what I'm looking for. Mina, thank you so much for joining me today. So I've never been to Portland, Oregon, but I hear that it's like really artsy, and if you want a bit of a hippie vibe, sort of trippy and a little bit like maybe Austin, Texas in the weirdness factor. Is that accurate?
Maybe Austin 20, 25 years ago, but I think it's got a little bit of like early San Francisco when it could still be afforded vibes. It's definitely like an artisty kind of hippie community, especially if you get out of downtown. It's really a collection of neighborhoods where it's pretty laid back and people just do their thing, and mushrooms of all kinds are very popular.
Cool. All right. Well, Portland sounds like a cool place to visit. So in your article for Different Leaf, you mentioned a number of really cool dispensaries, as you were saying. We'll get into the experiences and all the nature that you can hit up in Portland and around Portland. But let's start with the dispensaries. Which were your favorites and why did you include them in this list?
Sure. So I definitely liked Broadway Cannabis Market. The staff there was so knowledgeable and so down to earth. They really knew their products in and out and were more than happy to answer even the most basic questions and go deep on things. So I really loved that expertise. And then, as a woman in a cannabis shop, it was really nice to have someone just answer my questions and not be condescending or anything like that.
Yeah.
They also had a really big, broad selection and pretty good prices, even for Oregon.
So what are prices like in Oregon at the moment? How much is like an eighth of flour? What does that range look like?
I was seeing ounces for under $200 easily. Like you could probably get an eighth. Wow. Yeah, it gets pretty low at Broadway Cannabis. I was surprised. Oregon's had the cheapest weed in the country for years, so much so that some legal operators have struggled to stay in business. And there are some places that really look to make cannabis affordable. I was surprised. Edibles and flour and everything was so much cheaper than it is in Chicago.
That's interesting. I mean, that makes a lot of sense. But if you're traveling somewhere, you're definitely trying to keep your costs low. So that's good to know that you can do that in Portland for a little cheaper.
Indeed.
What about Electric Lettuce? That sounds like a really cool dispensary. Can you tell me a bit about that?
Sure. So Electric Lettuce is a local chain. There are a few different outposts. When you're thinking about a Portland cannabis dispensary, this is probably the kind of place that you have in mind. Mm-hmm. One is a little bit different, but they're all kind of hippie trippy and just a lot of fun. It's a good kind of experience if you're going to hit just one shop, especially if you're not particularly looking to go deep with your bud tender.
Oh, okay. All right. That's good to know. But when it comes to consumption, there are no lounges there.
Right.
What options do people have for legal consumption methods out there?
Right. So you need to be in a private place. So if you've got a friend, this might be a good time to call them. There are a couple of Airbnbs and private rentals where you might be able to smoke on site. Technically, hotels don't allow smoking. Every once in a while, people tell me they've been able to get away with it at one or two. So definitely something to keep in mind. Now, technically, you're not supposed to be smoking on the streets of Portland, but it is actually happening. I smelled a little bit of cannabis walking around. It was, no New York or Chicago, but it was definitely there. And it's Portland. So there are other things you see people doing in downtown as well. And so I'm not sure that, going after someone smoking a joint is necessarily the highest priority, but people seem much more respective of the laws there than they are in other cities.
Okay, so good to know you can't just walk around smoking, because I was in New York a few weeks ago and you could do that. I could smell it everywhere I went, because anywhere that you smoke tobacco in New York, you can smoke cannabis. But obviously there are many, many cities where that's not allowed. So you got to find somewhere that's legal. And since there aren't any lounges, the way that many places, including Portland, are getting around that is these private clubs that folks can go and be a member of. Did you know of any in Portland?
There's one called Flight Lounge. It's actually undergoing some renovation, so it's going to emerge a little bit differently. There's a couple of others that are kind of in the works and in the planning, but it's a little bit of a gray area right now.
And there was one other that you'd written about that caught my eye as a place that you can consume in Portland, and that is the Portlandia experience. What is that?
So you got to be a bus tour person for this. Okay. It's basically a bus tour that goes around to various sites you can consume on board. Now, one thing to keep in mind is this bus tour is actually not one that sells out. So there are times when it gets canceled. There was a Washington Post reporter who tried to go on it and it got canceled. But otherwise, it's kind of, that Stony tour of Portland in a silly bus.
I think that's probably one of the funnest things that you can do if you're really, really high in Portland.
Yeah, I mean, if you're really high and you want to go around and see places, but you don't want to figure out public transit or Uber or Drive, this is a really great way to do it and kind of get a lay of the land. I think tours like this are good because they kind of help you figure out where you are contextually, culturally, and help you hit the highlights when you've got limited time and money, as many people do on vacation.
Yeah, absolutely. And you do not want to be stoned and lost in a city you've never been to before. That sucks.
Well, not always. It can be fun.
Actually, that's true. It can be fun. So let's talk about things that are outside of the city. You mentioned a couple of different places that you can enjoy around Portland if you can sort of get outside of it. Beaches and mountains. There's a lot of nature right outside Portland, right? What was some of your favorites?
Yeah, definitely. So if you want to go hiking, there are hikes that you can do within city limits and just a short drive outside of city limits. You can find things for people of all level. The kind of iconic hike is to a gorgeous waterfall that's a couple of hours away from Portland. It's a bit of a hike, but it's, one of those postcard views that to have in real life is worth the effort. Head west and you'll hit the beach. So within a couple of hours of this, thriving kind of hippie city, you can have whatever nature you're looking for. And then even within the city, there's a gorgeous Japanese botanical garden and a Chinese botanical garden. So it's a place where the outdoors really seeps everywhere into places that look like the city.
That's gorgeous. I love to be high around nature. I would really, really dig that. Obviously, Portland has a really cool music scene as well. Are there any sort of secret gem music bars or music halls that you'd recommend?
So the best thing for Portland I found is I would call anybody there, like second and third degree connections. Where are their locals? Where do they go hang out? So I basically did this and I walked into what my friend described as his neighborhood local. And I'm looking around going, this is the most interesting, most on-brand Portland space I could have asked for. So I think that's really a good way to go for both bars and live music. Of course, if there's an alternative or indie band that you like, check and see if they're in Portland. But, whatever it is, I would try and find a hole in the wall venue, unless you're looking for a bigger band, and start there. I think those kinds of local neighborhood experiences, the things you would never know to Google for, the things that friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of friends or people in Facebook groups can lead you towards that are in their neighborhoods, those are going to be the most charming and interesting things you'll find in Portland.
That's such a good tip. Rely on the locals. They really know what's going on out there.
They do.
You mentioned munchies, so let's finish up by talking about the best restaurants, the best cafes. Obviously, there's so many that you can pick from, right? There's hundreds and hundreds.
Right.
So I guess what is Portland known for cuisine-wise? And then what do you think's best?
Portland is definitely a foodie city. I think the best thing is even it's like higher end fancy meals are somewhat affordable. And it's great for vegetarians. So as a vegetarian, I felt like everything was really catering to me. It was great. One thing that really surprised me as a person who grew up in Texas was how good the Southern food was. Like there was one place downtown called Grits and Gravy. It was an amazing place. You can get a great vegetarian biscuits and gravy. They have good grits. It's just like a good, simple comfort food breakfast. Service is great. Art on the walls is great. The vibe is very cool. And then there's another place a little bit outside of downtown just called Gravy. Now, this place is known for its French toast, and I went in thinking I'm going to be better and order oatmeal. French toast the size of my head. I've never seen anything like it. And then the oatmeal I got, this oatmeal brulee with bananas. It was like the most heavenly thing I've ever eaten. Like I didn't know you could do that to oatmeal. Wow. And I think that's kind of the trend that I found in Portland. I also did a vegetarian tasting dinner at something called The Workshop. I've seen all of these things separately, but I've never seen this done to them. And it was amazing, but also just beautiful and colorful and fresh local ingredients. And I think that really kind of sums up what you'll find in Portland is a lot of fresh stuff, a lot of local stuff, and a lot of just twists on basics that you might not have ever expected.
Nice. Oh my gosh, that sounds amazing. And when you've got the munchies, you want to eat some really good foods and a lot of it. And if you're from Texas and that's the biggest piece of French toast you've ever seen, that's really saying something.
Oh, but it's the biscuits that you really like having. Just like give me all of the biscuits. And it's not just humans. I found great dog treats, little peanut butter bowls from a dog. So
nice.
Brought those home. And it's a really creative foodie city. There's every kind of restaurant that you would like. But I think, again, the best part, there's also food trucks everywhere. You can have a really nice meal for under $10.
Oh, that's awesome. And also with food trucks, you get to sit and eat outside. That's really nice.
Yeah, and you can all get something different and you can try different things. But any kind of food that you're looking for, I was really surprised at the volume and variety of ethnicities that were represented, how authentic some of the options were. So it was really, I think if you look at Portland's food scene, you learn a lot about its immigrant scene as well.
Oh, that's really interesting. Finally, if there was one thing that you should say do not miss when you're going to Portland as a cannabis enthusiast, what would it be?
The dispensary experience. I think that you can have everything from like a high-end, like very fancy with a cute little boutique bag when you walk out to a very affordable, like neighborhood, everybody knows their bud tender's name kind of experience. So I think if you're a cannabis user, pick a few of them, go to them, try it out. And it's really interesting just to see how that scene has evolved there. I think it's got one of the most interesting retail experiences for consumers of anywhere that I've been. So it's worth it to check out a few and see how people are doing it and see how things have evolved. It's a much different world than it was 10 years ago.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Mina. Thank you so much for touring us around Portlandia. I'm excited to go visit now.
Indeed.
Thank you. And finally, we're chatting with my good friend, Carly Fisher. Good to see you. We're going to be talking about how to get hyphy in the Bay Area, I guess. Apparently, that's a word that they use out there.
Yeah, hyphy. It's been a pretty long San Francisco term. I'm not sure how in vogue it is now, but it's certainly well referenced.
All right, so let's talk about how to get stoned in San Francisco in a bit of a different way maybe than we've done it before, because obviously California is one of the biggest tourist hotspots is San Francisco. So everybody goes there. And when you go there, you're likely to try a bit of weed. But what if you're going there to try weed? Let's talk about some of the dispensaries that you were writing about in your article. What are your favorites from this amazing list?
Well, I have to say it was pretty cool to come out this past year just because I had been there right around the time that they first legalized. And it's really nice to see that there's been an expansion of consumption lounges, which really hadn't been there before. I think at the time, Vapor Room had a spot in the front where you could, maybe like a few tables, but it was sort of a small shop. And while it was cool to consume, it didn't quite have the same feeling as when you go to Amsterdam and you can just pop into somewhere and see what it's like. So I think what's really neat is that there's been an expansion of dispensaries that are really curating their selection. And I love that because Flore, for example, they specialize with craft farmers and they really go through and label all their products. So, like this is woman owned, this is BIPOC owned, this is craft farmer who does sun grown, outdoor grown. And that type of transparency is so important, not only in terms of just like ethics in the industry, but also just consumer understanding and education, which is so challenging these days.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I always want to know where my cannabis is coming from. And I think when you travel, one of the really cool highlights is that you get to try different things from that region of the world, from that soil, from that environment. And I want to know who the craft producers are in that state. So Flore Dispensary is a good one to go to. Let's talk about it's in the Castro district.
Eureka Sky is in the Castro, very close to Flore, which is also in the Castro. And the Castro has such an important historical reference for San Francisco, just in terms of queer culture and involvement, because queer communities were pretty much paramount into the legalization argument. That started way back in terms of the AIDS epidemic and people finding that cannabis was really important for helping them with medicine where they had been neglected in other ways. And so that community with Brownie Mary, Dennis Perone, all of these four people that had, these pioneers and trailblazers had really been so important, and that's not always necessarily recognized in the national conversation. So I will say going to Eureka Sky, going to Flore in this area is so valuable because this is sort of where it all began. And from an experience perspective, I love them. They're all totally different vibes. Every place you go in, their selection is entirely different. And this concentration between the Castro isn't that far from Apothecarium and a bunch of places. So I really love that you can do a little bit of a dispensary crawl if you want to check out different offerings and then find a consumption lounge, which I will say when you go to a consumption lounge, you can't bring in outside product.
Okay, so I wanted to ask about consumption there. You mentioned that there's consumption lounges around San Fran. It's not BYOC, it's not bring your own cannabis.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I've heard off the cuff that there's a few bars that have outdoor areas where they don't mind. And technically it's not legal to consume on the street or whatever, but like a lot of people do it anyway. Not as much as New York, but if you go down some corner, nobody's really going to care that much. But for the consumption spaces, they usually include a dispensary that's in there as well as a place that you can consume on property. But for outside consumption, usually you'll have to find either an Airbnb or like some kind of private accommodation that allows you to smoke, or you'll have to take your chances and try to find some private areas to consume or discreet methods. So maybe it's not smoking. Maybe you take edibles. And they have great edibles in San Francisco, by the way.
Oh my gosh, where do you start? There's so many options in San Francisco. I'm really glad there's this guide to narrow it down.
Oh, it's so great to work on it.
I wanted to talk about Mo Green's. This place sounds incredibly cool. This is somewhere where you can go to consume on site. Tell us how you found out about this. Have you been there? What's it like?
I did go to Mo Green's and I loved it. I didn't even realize that it was even more expansive than what I saw because it was such a huge amount of space that you could consume. And I just loved their whole lounge. It has this retro green aesthetic with these really nice booths that are very cozy. And there's wares that they have in terms of there's ashtrays on every table and rolling papers and grinders and all the things that you would need to pack yourself a joint. But also it was awesome to not just consume, but not have to leave immediately after. I could draw or write, or I think they had a TV in there. And it's a great place to socialize in the way that you are taking a moment for yourself to intoxicate yourself a little bit. So it's nice to actually have a place to enjoy that versus feeling like you have to rush off. But their space is fabulous. And they also own Barbary Coast, which is another consumption lounge. And that one is sort of a nod to the old Victorian age of San Francisco. It has these plush, dark reds, and it's a little bit on the darker side and just has a bit of a more of a salon feel. And they also have a dispensary when you are up front, and their offerings are totally different too. So it's kind of nice because even if you hit up one and you go somewhere else, you can find all sorts of things you didn't even know before.
Oh my gosh, that's fantastic. I love the sorts of characteristics you get in San Francisco. The bars there, everything's got like a definite aesthetic and theme to it. And it sounds like they're doing the same thing with the cannabis lounges, which is very cool. Let's talk about what to do when we're high in San Francisco. There's so much touristy stuff you can do. And for me, when I'm high and in a new city, I sort of want to steer clear of the typical touristy things. But let's talk about some of the specific spots that you suggested, including one of my favorites, the Exploratorium. Carly, what is it?
It is kind of intended for kids, actually, but it's one of those places that you can have a visual delight in terms of experimenting with different types of science and going on your explorer mission while you're a little buzzed, and hopefully no one is the wiser. It's funny, I definitely consulted the people who live there to get their recommendations on places they could go. But I will say one of the more challenging aspects of doing this was that there were so many places I couldn't even fit in. I could barely even fit in Haight-Ashbury, which was like the main point of the hippie revolution, and like going to Hippie Hill and Golden Gate Park. And I mean, that's the thing is San Francisco, because of its proximity to the ocean and with the bay, you have so many vantage points to really enjoying nature. They have, of course, these museums, and there's the weird and wonderful ones that you can find all over, not just in the city, but even if you're going to go to day trips to even San Jose, there's the Winchester House. It's kind of spooky, which is kind of cool. And then there's the park. I could spend all day at the park. And there's a delicious restaurant. San Francisco is one of the best food scenes in the whole country. And I ate so well when I was there. And I feel cannabis does enhance those flavor profiles. And that's just San Francisco. I haven't even gotten into Oakland, the Bay Area. I mean, that's similar to New York. You could live there your whole life and still not see everything. So you pack it in, especially with being conscientious of your time while you are high. There's always something more to see.
There's so many things to pick from. I think that it's a great idea when you're going somewhere to get high to decide if you want to do like those weird and wonderful museums and art galleries, or if you want to do, you know, nature and see outdoor marvels like the Golden Gate Bridge. You're right, there's just so many things to do. So I would really design yourself, and not necessarily an itinerary, but at least a must-see list while you're there, because otherwise you can really get lost in all of the many things just in one little area of the city, and you miss so much else, right?
Well, you know, when I was doing it, it was definitely, I put myself on a pretty regimented schedule because I wanted to go check out so many different things. And you can hit the pavement and walk between a lot of places, but it's also pretty important to make sure you're being cautious about where you're going. Not all neighborhoods are great, and some can be a little rough around the edges. And I would recommend taking a car to avoid the Tenderloin, for instance, which can be a little jarring if you've left a dispensary and you walk into some pretty rough areas. But also the hills are crazy. I was actually going to say among my activities that I would not recommend for San Francisco is biking, unless you happen to be a really good biker, because I could barely walk. I was like walking 30 minutes uphill from the Castro to Twin Peaks. I was like, am I there yet? I feel
very hilly.
It's challenging if you're trying to relax.
Definitely very hilly. Some of the things that I like to do when I'm in San Francisco and I'm too stoned to move anywhere is to get the trolleys. They are fun. They go up the hill and they give you a real great view.
Oh, absolutely. And the crookedest street in America or the world or whatever is there, which I think is fun if you're already trying to see something a little weird and unusual, but go for a scenic walk, which gives you great views once you're up there, too.
Yes, that's such a good one. The other items that you've listed that really caught my eye, like you mentioned, Oakland, right on the other side of the bay to San Francisco. Oakland has a cannabis trail, and this will take you through all of the best spots for cannabis enthusiasts in Oakland. And on top of having a really cool cannabis scene, Oakland also has this huge, gorgeous lake that you can go and sit and picnic around, right? Like there's just so many places where you can zoom in and be like, I want to spend a day here being stoned. Have you been to Oakland? And if so, what did you like about it the most?
Oh, I love Oakland. So I think I don't even know if I mentioned this, but my newsletter and podcast is called The Weed Witch. And when I was in Oakland, one of the things I love is it's super witchy. There's a lot of really cool back alleys, like in Temecula Alley, that have just all these artists and makers. And, you know, I had gotten a little terrarium that I thought was so cool that I could put together myself. And the food is so fabulous. And as you mentioned, the lake there is just very scenic, especially on a really nice day to have a picnic. You know, I think when you're mentioning just as far as the Oakland Cannabis Trail, one thing to note that I really appreciate is that the Bay Area, I think, has leaned in the most to cannabis tourism versus any other place that I've seen in the state so far. I know New York is in the process of ramping up everything here, and Seattle and Portland have had these long established places, and same thing with LA. But I would say the Bay Area does the most to be welcoming to people to really explore and enjoy their cannabis through a historical perspective, from a spa and wellness perspective, from restaurants. I really just think that they've integrated it into as much of a tourism and hospitality point that any place should really start looking to what they're doing. It's not just Oakland and San Francisco, but it's a starting point that goes all the way up to Humboldt County in the Emerald Triangle. And so you can really, you're pinpointing however far you want to go in NorCal and seeing like, all right, I started here in the city at a dispensary and I enjoyed cannabis, or I had just such a great weekend checking out these consumption lounges. Why don't I go visit a farm and see what's going on there? And I think especially as things continue to grow, those experiences, the inclusive ones where you can really enjoy your product on premise, will continue to grow.
That's such a great point. There's so much further north of San Francisco. It can be a great hub to start with. So as you've written about in the Different Leaf article, just north of San Francisco is Marin County, which is where you can see some of those big redwood trees. Oh my God, hug a redwood tree when you're high and tell me it's not the best thing you've ever done. That's something that I'd want to do on my cannabis vacation.
I thought that driving through there, being on the bay, just getting the perspective even from being on the other side is really fabulous. And as you go more up north into Mendocino County, into some of these other places, you can stay inland and go through the hills, or you can go out more west and really ride. I think it's the 101 is along the coast, which I had the pleasure of doing once, actually, starting in San Diego and going all the way through Big Sur, everything, like went through LA and just did a long trip. So that dream is still very much alive, and you can end it up in Humboldt if you want.
Oh, yeah. And take a little side trip through Sonoma and Napa. Yeah. There's tons and tons of fun things to do along the way. I've done that same drive from San Diego up to San Francisco. I used to live in that sort of area. But that was 8-9 years ago. I'm sure that so much has changed and so many new cool places have opened. Really, really glad that I've got this new guide for San Francisco in the newest issue of Different Leaf. Thank you so, so much for touring us around, Carly Fisher. Thank you so much, Carly.
Thank you.
A big thanks to our writers Hannah, Mina, and Carly for being our guests this episode. Be sure to read their articles about their cities on page 36 of the new Different Leaf issue, available now at differentleaf.com. Next week, we'll be talking about the intersection of cannabis and sci-fi, fantasy, graphic novel culture with president and head of studio at Heavy Metal magazine, Tommy Corial.
The brand really became the inspiration for science fiction, fantasy, and to an extent horror storytelling that we see today. All of the great filmmakers of today, George Lucas, Ridley Scott, Jon Favreau, they can all draw a straight line back to heavy metal as being kind of the single greatest either inspiration to them or inflection point in the industry.
I can just see the crossover with cannabis.
100%. There's a lot of overlap. If and when you do get a chance to go to Comic-Con, just stand outside the doors and you'll smell the overlap. It's very, very prevalent there for sure.
Make sure you're subscribed wherever you're listening right now so you don't miss that next episode. And do us a solid and leave us a review wherever you're listening right now for some extra good karma. Follow us on social media at Different Leaf, and I'm on social media at Brit the British. Also make sure to check out our dope new merch line at xdifferentleaf.com.